Described and Captioned Media Program. In the classroom and online, dcmp.org. Film Ideas Incorporated presents The 1900s.
Dayton, Ohio. Everything started here with a toy. As children, Orville and Wilbur were already dreaming of it, but they stayed on the ground.
Hands spin a toy helicopter blade, which soars toward the ceiling.
Wilkinson Wright, nephew.
They were ministers' sons, and so, as you might expect, they were impeccably neat, extremely courteous. They didn't drink, they didn't swear.
Flying was their passion. Wilbur wrote, "I think it will cost me a lot of money and maybe my life too." The pioneers of flying stayed on the ground in these years, or only a few of them returned. Well-known plane makers like Otto Lilienthal paid with their lives.
An elaborate box kite crashes. A man stands in a harness at the center of a giant pair of wings. He runs down a grassy hill. Nephew Wilkinson Wright.
Lilienthal had been killed in a glider accident. So when they found that Lilienthal's data was not giving them the results that they wanted, they started trying to develop their own data.
Two sheds in a field.
September 1900. Kitty Hawk's Dunes. The bicycle manufacturers built their first flying object on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. Their family in Dayton considered their important work a hobby.
In a photo, cabin shelves are lined with food cans. The Wrights work in a shop.
Orville and Will were getting ready to go to Kitty Hawk. As soon as they get to Kitty Hawk, they'll be all right down there in the sand and the sun. In effect, they thought, they looked on it as a vacation.
The Wright brothers built something else besides their first plane. They tested their glider that rather looked like a dragon in a wind channel.
Air currents flow from a boxy device. Darrell Collins, Kitty Hawk National Park.
They actually called their wind tunnel the Magic Box because it unlocked the secrets of flight.
Men run to guide a floating glider.
Summer 1902. Their flying object did not have an engine yet, but it could be controlled in the air. The Wright brothers were one gust in front of their rivals.
The glider hangs a few feet over the dunes, its pilot lying flat on the lower wing.
Returning back to Dayton, the brothers did other experiments. They earned money by repairing bicycles. The engine and the propeller is the child of their passion. They were finished by spring 1903.
The Described and Captioned Media Program provides services designed to benefit students who are blind, visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf-blind. These services include a library of free-loaned described and captioned educational media, a clearinghouse of information related to educational media access, a gateway to internet resources related to accessibility, and a center for training and evaluation of any service provider desiring to appear on the DCMP's approved lists of description and captioning service providers. There are no user registration or service fees. Visit the DCMP at dcmp.org. The DCMP is funded by the U.S. Department of Education and administered by the National Association of the Deaf.